So, first of all, we have to check ourselves, right? Check our expectations of being a Christian in this world. And those expectations must include suffering. There's no way around it. Why? You've heard me say it a million times. We live in a fallen world. What are we to expect? Not only is the world fallen, we're fallen. Our thinking, our emotions, our decisions, have everything messed up. So I need to devote myself to you, and I need to inspect myself, examine myself. Where am I? How am I living out the truth? Do I ooze hope? Am I like generous giving? Or am I so tight nobody can even get a smile from me because they might take advantage of me?
So let my life be the proof of your love. Let my love look like you and what you're made of.
Okay, we've been going over the Gospel of Matthew, and again, it's just rich. We see the Gospel of Matthew where Matthew is writing to people, and got to remember that Matthew wrote several decades after Jesus had died and rose again from the dead. So now he's writing. A lot of the people would remember, maybe were even there when these things happened. So we got to keep that in mind as we read Matthew. We're in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. And if you remember, we just finished the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And then we started on Matthew chapter 8, and we've covered up to, verse 13. And now we're going to then proceed from there, verse 14 and following. I was just hearing today that a bill has been, quote unquote, passed so that the rest of the Congress can vote on it, even though the rest of the Congress had not seen it, and it's over $1 trillion. It was snuck in there, around midnight or right a little after midnight, and nobody had seen it, but nobody was able to debate it or anything, so now Congress has to vote on it. Over $1 trillion omnibus bill, that's what they call it. So what do? So much corruption. And the more we understand, we're also learning that actually it's been a year or more, 2 or 3 years, where some people have been pushing for a war with Russia. And now we're all like, oh, Russia is bad. And yet several people in government have been pushing for this. What do we do? And then most of us know that many people don't want to work. There are signs out there, now hiring, and people don't want to work. I had someone that has in the business of a junkyard, and he, buys and sells cars. He buys them, fixes them, gets them to the body shop, and then sells them. Well, now the body shop is not able to fix cars because nobody wants to work, even fixing cars. Why? Because they're getting a lot of money from the government assistance. And so inflation keeps going, increasing. Very alarming. So, and to top it all off, all this lies and corruption are being presented with a straight face, like sincerely, like this is the right thing to do, and lies and corruption. So in such a climate as this, and devotion to anyone or anything it's dangerous. It feels dangerous to devote and to commit. And maybe you in this audience, us where we're here, maybe no, we're secure, but if we look around, people don't want to commit to anything or anyone. They don't want to go to church. They don't want to do things because they're already fear that corruption is there and lies and so forth. So it feels dangerous to commit to anyone or anything with any kind of devotion. And our young people especially feel this. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, the Apostle Paul speaks about lies and so forth. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1, but the Spirit explicitly says that in latter times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. By means of hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of liars, seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron. Like they have no more conscience. They lie, but no big deal. They openly lie and no big deal. There's a deep, profound arrogance. No fear of God. And if they do claim to know God, it's a fake, because their lifestyles and their lies give them away. But there's no fear. There's no fear. So we have to ask of ourselves, how are we responding to such a situation? We can be outraged and angry and lose focus. We can try to numb ourselves and escape, try to escape. That doesn't represent Jesus very well. We can go, have informed and try to force some things. That doesn't work either. So how are you dealing with all this going on? Are you turning to anyone, or are you a loner? Because that's also another temptation, right? Who are you turning to? Do you have any hope? Do you have any hope? Because it's very important, because if we don't have hope, how in the world can we speak with confidence to anyone else? So the question, do you have any hope? Are you devoting to anything or anyone? Well, what about God? And what He has been doing? We can easily say, oh, yes, I'm devoted to God. Yes. Does it show? Do people know that you are devoted and you're willing to speak and be sacrificial in your living because you're willing to give, trusting God? And that's why it's so wonderful to go back to the scriptures and to see Jesus, because He is our hope. He is our master. He is our guide. He is our leader. He is our King. And in these verses, Matthew chapter 8, verses 4 through 22, this is what we're going to cover. Jesus is the one who delivers from evil. Jesus is the one who delivers from evil, but claims top priority, top devotion. That's what He claims, top devotion. And we're going to see a little bit that. Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 14. When Jesus came into Peter's home, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. When evening came, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out spirits with a word and healed all who were ill. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. He himself took our infirmities and carried away our diseases. Now, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. When a scribe came and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go," Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes and the birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, permit me to first go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me and allow the dead to bury their own dead." Well, that's a little shocking. It's kind of cruel of Jesus to have said that. We'll look at that. So we see Jesus, yes, he is the one who delivers from evil. He touched Peter's mother-in-law's hand, the fever left. 14 through 17, but Jesus claims top priority. Jesus claims top priority, verses 18 through 22. So we find here Jesus. What's the context here? The context is that Jesus has been healing, and even the centurion, when he said, "Hey, my servant," and Jesus says, "Go," the centurion realized that Jesus didn't need to go actually. Jesus is Lord of distance, of time, of everything. And Jesus was amazed at the faith of the centurion. That's what he's looking for in Israel. And that's what he's looking for in us. A faith that really, really devotes everything to him. Why? Because he is God. He really is the one who delivers from evil. Right? And so what we find here is that Jesus showing himself to be the king who really sees through everything and gets down to what the real problem is. And so he's the one. He's the one, right? And I want you to know the first thing here in the first 14 through 17, that Jesus doesn't talk about faith, nor the text. It's just showing that Jesus is king, with or without our faith. He doesn't need our faith. He's the one that has control over evil, right? So we find in verse 14, when he entered Peter's home, he saw. And when the text says that God sees something, it means more than just visual perception. When it says that God sees, that means that God is going to do something about it. Right? And so he saw, Peter's mother-in-law sick there in the fever, and he touched her, and the fever left. Now, the fever is part of evil, part of the fall. Ultimately, it goes back to when our first parents fell, and then all the generations after that sinned more and more and more, and it causes all kinds of problems. And sometimes we're not even aware, or we haven't made any decisions, but because of our fallenness, here comes diseases, here comes fever, here comes COVID-19, even though man-made perhaps, probably. But still, it's the corruption, the fallenness of man. Evil is everywhere. You see, the fever was just the effect of the real problem. You see, I remember taking my car to a mechanic. It was knocking. He did something and he fixed it. The knocking was just the effects of something that was wrong, right? It's the same thing here with the fever. Something is causing it. And because we're talking about a theological book, this is, again, something that's very important. When we read the Bible, we're not reading necessarily a scientific book. We're reading a theological book, meaning the main purpose of the Bible is to reveal to us who God is, right? And the problem between us and how God works to solve those problems. And being that the case, we find that Matthew is writing about Jesus, who is God. And so the fever is just a symptom of the real problem. The real problem is evil. In Luke 4, verse 39, the same event when Jesus sees Peter's mother-in-law and she's sick, and it says there that Jesus rebuked the fever. Like when he rebuked demons. Meaning, ultimately there's evil there. And Jesus is the one that delivers from evil, right? And so there's all kinds of situations where we see that. And I want you to know again, he touched her. Think of it. Jesus risks getting infected, whatever it was. Of course, he's God. So his divinity is going to overwhelm any evil, right? But he wasn't afraid to touch her. And so when we turn to Jesus to say, I don't have to fear, right? And the restoration was complete. It says there that she got up and did what? She served him. I mean, that's really the purpose of God healing us. God giving us all that we need. It's not just so that, oh, well, now I'm happy. No. He restores us. He gives us everything we need so that we can serve. Right? And so here's what we have Jesus. It's a little microcosm of the whole ministry of Jesus. That he came to restore us so that we would serve. And notice, as I said, nothing about faith. It doesn't say that she had faith and that's why Jesus healed her. No, because Jesus is king. He's the one that delivers us. And so again, this is a microcosm of who Jesus is and what he came to do and restore us so that we can be functional in the sense of living for God, the very purpose that we were created for. It's not about just being happy here on earth. It's about serving God, right? And then it says, when evening came, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out spirits with a word and healed all who were ill. You have to imagine that. How grueling, how tiresome. Sometimes in my own day, I help two people and I need to take 2 or 3 naps. People demon-possessed and, more and more and more all day long. Can you imagine the exhaustion? And there he was, but he's the king. And then Matthew remembers. He remembers something of the Old Testament. And this is what's so beautiful about the Bible. It's wonderful how the Bible ties in all that is happening, whether in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and they're tied together. So Matthew quotes from Isaiah 53. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. He himself took our infirmities and carried away our diseases. Carried away our diseases. He quotes from Isaiah 53, very important, Isaiah 53, verse 4, part A and B of Isaiah 53, verse 4. He doesn't quote the whole verse, but especially when you read in the New Testament, when you read something of the Old Testament, they're already assuming that you're going to read the whole context, right? And you have to remember as well what I said, that Matthew was writing a couple of decades after Jesus had died and risen from the dead. So people reading would say, oh yeah, I remember that happening. Jesus was healing. And and Matthew tied it to Isaiah 53. So look at Isaiah 53, verse 4. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. That's what Matthew basically quotes. But knowing that, especially the Jews are going to know the context. And what happened? Look at the part C and D of verse 4 of Isaiah 53. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. I mean, some of us were crying out, crucify him, crucify him. Remember at the end? Oh yeah, we thought he was accursed of God. And the Jews had this teaching that if you were sick or something happened to you, that was retribution from God. Because somehow you had sinned and boom, you were condemned, and this is the way you were being treated by God. Automatically. So when Jesus took all our infirmities and he was up on the cross, you see, he's cursed. And that's what now Matthew quotes the first two parts of verse 4, but then the second part of verse 4 shows what was happening with the people. But now Isaiah 53 goes beyond the physical, which is the more fundamental problem. It's not the fever that Peter's mother-in-law had that was the fundamental problem. It was much, much deeper, because now verse 5 of Isaiah 53 says what? Verse 5. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. That is the more fundamental, the deepest problem. It's sinfulness. And this is quoted several times in the New Testament, and people mistaken it by attributing it to physical healing. 1 Peter chapter 2, that's where people quote and they think, you see, by Jesus' healing, we're healed in Jesus' name. And they're just concentrated on the physical. But when you look at the context in Isaiah, it's about sin. 1 Peter chapter 2. And verse 21. Let's see. No, I mean 2 Peter. No wonder, like dog vomiting. That's not the passage I want to look for. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. And he himself bore our sins on his body on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. For by his wounds we were healed. Quoting from Isaiah 53. You see? But it's not about necessarily the physicalness. It's about the spiritual, the sinfulness. And so when we go back to Matthew 8, and Jesus delivering Peter's mother-in-law out of the fever, there's something much, much deeper than that, because Matthew quotes from Isaiah 53. And he knows that whoever knows the Old Testament, or the Jews especially, they're going to read the context of the part that he quoted from. And so, from these verses 14 to 17, we see that Jesus is the one who delivers us from evil. That includes all evil, right? Spiritual and physical. But that's just, it's not talking about timing, right? When does he do that? He might do it today. He might do it 10 years from now. He might do it when they're dying. He might see it after we die. But he's the one that delivers us. That's the main point, right? And so, okay, Jesus is the one. Well, and he's casting out demons. He's healing people left and right. What happens to us when we see something like that? What happens to people? Man, that's where the action is, man. I want to get in on the action, right? So now what do we have? There's crowds coming around and they're, man, Jesus' popularity. And what did Jesus do? He says, you know what? I need to thin the herd. I need to kind of, who's really seeing straight here? Or do they just want the piece of the action? Do they just want all the goodies? Because I'm doing all kinds of stuff and there's a lot of people coming in. So we find then in verse 18 that Jesus is going to start really dealing with the crowd themselves. Because in Matthew 5 through 7, what do we find? Great teachings. In Matthew 8, 1 through 7, great healings. And then more healings, right? In verse 16. And so then, in verse 18, we have great following, right? Now, when Jesus saw, and there it is the word again, saw, he's going to do something about it. And when he saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. Now, whenever there's an action that's ordered, sometimes the true colors are going to come out, right? As long as we don't make any decisions, as long as nobody's making any decisions, it's like, okay, we're kind of just flopping around. Let's see what's going to happen. But once an action is called on, okay, who's going to actually, how are you going to react? Right. And that's what Jesus, he sees the crowd. It's like, okay, we need to do something about this. Let's go to the other side. Oh. Then a scribe, it says, the scribes were the educated. They were the teachers. And at that time, the teachers were held really high. In fact, the teachers were held so high that when a man walked into a house, it might have been his own parents' house. The parents stood up in respect. That's how high the teachers were evaluated and seen. So if a teacher walks into his own house and now if his parents are teachers already themselves, like, okay, you know, but if only the son was a teacher, even the parents would stand up in respect. And so this is who's coming to Jesus, an educated person. And so a scribe came and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Oh? What's motivating you? You just want a piece of the action? Or you really know me? Because you see, following me, listen to this, following me is not about money, it's not about prestige, it's not about possessions. No. You really want to live the Christian life? Look at my own life, Jesus is saying. The foxes have holes, the birds have nests, but the Son of Man does not have a place to lay his head. You sure you want to follow me? What's the motivation for following Jesus? Do we know him as king? Do we know him as someone who really can take care of evil? Thank you. Because that's who he is. And so we have to have the right motivation to be following him. And of course, with all the crowds, as I said, when we see that, people want a piece of the action. Maybe there's some little money in there. Maybe there's going to be a position. Maybe, and we know that's all too true, right? In the administrations. A change of bosses. They bring in their peeps, right? And here's all this crowds, and okay, this educated man is like, okay, here's a chance. I'm gonna say, I'll follow you anywhere. The Christian life is not about prestige. It's not about money. It's not about I'm gonna be blessed and I'm gonna have all these possessions. It's about following the person, the King, Jesus Christ. Are you sure you want to follow? Jesus is weeding out those that just want a piece of the action, but really do not know him. You see? Because he really is the one who takes care of all evil. He is the deliverer from evil, right? And so, and then it gets even more so, because again, remember, he's weeding out. So then it says, not a scribe. Verse 21 says what? Another of his disciples said. A disciple was somebody that had already made some kind of commitment. He already made some kind of commitment. I'm a follower of Jesus. Oh, that's so easy to say, no? Words are cheap. So now here comes this, are you really, really committed? Do you really know who I am? Are you willing to pay a big price? Because the price is steep. Because this disciple, this person who had made some kind of commitment now said to him, Lord, permit me to first, that's the key word, first, meaning I have this priority more than what you're after. I have this other important thing that's actually more important. I want to follow you. But permit me first, this other priority that I have. First, to go and bury my father. And then Jesus makes this whoa, what a statement. Follow me. You need to have me as absolute top priority. Your devotion to me must be above anyone else, including your own relatives. I mean, you mean even when they're dying? Well, then his statement, let the dead bury the dead. That's a figure of speech. When the same word is used in the same sentence but different meanings, that's a figure of speech. And here, what is repeated? Dead. Dead has two different meanings in the same sentence. Let the dead bury the dead. Kind of simple to figure out, right? Let the dead bury, meaning they might still be breathing, have strength, but they're spiritually dead. There's a refusal to trust God and turn to Jesus. They are spiritually dead. Let those spiritually dead bury the physically dead. The physically dead, they're gone. And those who don't want to turn to me, let them take care of that. You have me as top priority, top devotion. What do we make of that? Well, either Jesus was just plain cruel, or he is God who legitimately says, you got to have me as top devotion above anyone or anything else. Only God can say that. And that's who's speaking there. Wow. And so for us to, realize that, especially in times that we live in, where there's so many lies and corruption and everybody's selfish, everybody's self-protective, nobody wants to give to anyone else because I might be taken advantage of. To say, no, Jesus is my King, my Lord. He is the one who delivers me from evil. Not myself, not anyone else, and He has my back. So I can keep giving. I can have all kinds of hope because Jesus is King. He didn't have to have Peter's wife, okay, do you have faith in me or not? Nah, bzz, fever gone. Got up and served him. He's the King of all that's over all evil. And so, it's in a way, of course, it's a sacrifice, right? To let go of certain relationships because they don't want Jesus. And so Jesus says, "You going to follow me or not? Let the dead bury the dead." They don't want to follow. So for us to realize that Jesus is the one who delivers from evil, but claims top devotion. Jesus is the one that delivers us from evil, but claims top devotion from us. So where do we start as far as, how do we live this out? What can we do? So first of all, we have to check ourselves, right? Check our expectations of being a Christian in this world. And those expectations must include suffering. There's no way around it. Why? You've heard me say it 1,000,000 times. We live in a fallen world. What are we to expect? Not only is the world fallen, we're fallen. Our thinking, our emotions, our decisions have everything messed up. So I need to devote myself to you, and I need to inspect myself, examine myself. Where am I? How am I living out the truth? Do I ooze hope? Am I like generous giving? Or am I so tight nobody can even get a smile from me because they might take advantage of me? So we need to check our expectations of being a Christian in this world. John 16, verse 33, Jesus said it, right? In this world, you're going to have tribulation. But take heart. I have overcome the world, right? But it takes that commitment, that devotion, as we examine ourselves and if we find ourselves falling short. It's not about, okay, let me stab myself, stab, I'm bad. No. It's like, Lord, forgive me, Lord. I'm going to trust you as I examine myself and I see that where I fail, Lord, you're my King. You're the one that can touch me and restore me so that I can be useful for your kingdom. But initially, it takes that self-examination saying, Lord, search me, O God, and see if there's any wicked way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Psalm 139, right? So that's the first application. Check our expectations of being a Christian. And I'm telling you, it needs to include the probability that we're going to suffer. It may be physical. It may be social. It may be financial. It might be, name it. But as we live for the Lord, we probably need to he'd be wise to say it's probably going to be some suffering. And in that suffering, I need to trust the Lord. Here's the second application. From verse 21, we need to check our willingness to give up certain cherished relationships. We need to be willing to give up certain cherished relationships for the sake of following Christ. But you don't understand, these people are fun. I can't give them up. Yeah. They take me away from the Lord. They take me away, but I can't give them up. Okay? Oh, these people, they're my relatives. I've known them for all these something million years. I can't give them up. I know they don't want to follow the Lord, but we need to check our willingness to let go of some cherished relationships for the sake of following Christ. Because following Christ means that I'm going to spend more time over here than over here. And we have to be very conscious, very intentional. It's not just, well, let's see what happens. Oh, that's not an opportunity to be with them. Okay, I'll go to church. Or, I'll go to church to see if that made me feel good. No, it needs to be very intentional. I could be doing this late Saturday night, and that means I'm not going to be able to get up to go to church, to be with fellow believers, to develop relationships. No, I'm going to give that up so I'm ready to worship God. Conscious, fully aware. And I need to let go of some things, some relationships. Friends that make us feel good, we might need to let them go. Some relatives that refuse Jesus. Not that we have to be mean, not that we have to be ugly. No, it's just I'm going to choose to be over here developing godly relationships because you refuse, right? So that was the second application. Check our willingness to give up certain very cherished relationships for the sake of following Christ. Finally, it's really a matter of saying, I'm consciously going to decide to live a sacrificial life. Consciously make that decision. And I just keep stressing consciously and intentionally, because if we do not, then it's just like, well, let's see what happens in life. And something happens and boom, we're pushed this way. And something happens, boom, we're pushed this way. And life just happens to me. Like a ball in a pinball machine, ping, 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 and the ball goes all over the place. No decision. The ball makes no decisions. Life just happens to the ball. And that's what happens in our lives when we don't make conscious, intentional decisions. And so right now, the decision I'm calling for, that I think this text calls for, is a conscious decision to live a sacrificial life. Romans 12:1. Many of us already know that. Therefore, Romans 12:1, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, by the fact that he had mercy and saved us, deliver us from evil, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. This is the proper response to Jesus, who is the King who delivers us from evil and claims our top devotion to him. And I say, it's a sacrificial commitment, a life of sacrifice for him. That can mean so many things. But if there is a fundamental commitment, you see, then when the actual little decisions come, or things that we need to sacrifice, it's, I made this decision that I'm going to live sacrificially for him. You see, it's my spiritual service to him, and he's worthy now and to eternity. Right? And so that's what we find in Jesus in Matthew chapter 8, those few verses, that really Jesus is the one. He is the one who delivers us from evil but claims that we must give him top devotion. Will we? Will we? Because we can all say, kind of like the disciple, oh, I'm a follower of you. But first, here's a priority that I have. Jesus says, no, you follow me. You have me as top, period. Will we?
So let my life be the proof of